It was the kind of evening that looked perfect from the outside. Warm lights spilling out from the restaurant windows, clinking glasses, the low hum of conversation under a ceiling draped with twinkle lights. I'd been here before, but never like this. Tonight was her birthday, and the table was full of her friends, colleagues, even her sister, all dressed like the night was about them too. I'd worn the navy blazer she always liked, the one she said made me look presentable in public. I walked in holding the small box I'd wrapped myself, with the sort of care you put into something when you actually love the person you're giving it to. She was already standing at the head of the long table, champagne in hand, commanding the room with that laugh of hers. The one that used to feel like sunlight, but had lately started to sound like glass breaking in the next room. When she saw me, she smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, here's my roommate," she said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. There was polite laughter, the kind that hides behind wine glasses and sideways glances. A couple of her friends smirked. Someone muttered something I couldn't catch. I froze for half a beat. My mind did this quick calculation. I could laugh it off, like it was some private joke everyone else just happened to be in on. Or I could call it what it was, humiliation with a bow on top. I chose neither. Instead, I smiled, slid into the seat next to her, and set the small wrapped box in front of her. She didn't touch it. She was too busy launching into a story about her latest project at work, dropping the names of people I'd never met but was apparently supposed to be impressed by. Dinner carried on around me like I wasn't there. I caught bits of conversation, vacations, promotions, gossip about someone's messy divorce. When her best friend asked how living together was going, she didn't correct her. She just said, "Oh, you know, it works for now," with a shrug that suggested I was the human equivalent of an old couch someone couldn't be bothered to replace. My fork clinked against the plate as I pushed food around, appetite gone. There's a particular kind of silence that fills you up when you realize the person you've been building a life with is tearing you down one joke at a time. I'd felt it before, in smaller doses, a jab here, a dismissive comment there, but tonight, she'd gone for the public spectacle. I thought back to the first birthday I spent with her. We'd been dating only a few months. I'd cooked for her, badly, in my tiny apartment, and she'd called it the best meal she'd ever had. She'd kissed me like I'd just given her the world. Now, 3 years later, I was sitting at a table full of strangers while she rewrote me into a background character in her own life story. Halfway through dessert, the waiter brought the bill. She reached for her card with a flourish, announcing she was treating everyone tonight. More applause. More of that shallow admiration she seemed to collect like currency. When the waiter returned, he bent down slightly and said, "I'm sorry, ma'am, but your card's been declined." Her cheeks flushed, but she laughed it off. "Oh, must be a glitch. Try it again." I reached into my jacket pocket, not for my wallet, but for the envelope I'd prepared earlier that day. I slid it across the table to her. Inside was the rent bill for the apartment we shared. Her share, itemized and neatly printed. The laughter at the table faltered as she opened it. She looked up at me, a flicker of something, confusion, maybe anger, passing through her eyes. "Thought the roommate should get this to you," I said softly, just loud enough for the people nearest us to hear. Then I stood, placed my napkin on the table, and walked out into the cool night air, leaving her to explain to her friends why her card had failed and why her so-called roommate was gone before the candles had even been blown out. I didn't look back. Not yet. That would come later. The street outside the restaurant was quiet compared to the hum inside. My breath clouded in the cool air as I walked toward the parking lot, not in any hurry. I wasn't leaving in a rage. I was leaving in clarity. There's a difference. Rage is noisy and sloppy. Clarity is silent, precise. I sat in my car for a moment before starting it, my fingers drumming lightly on the steering wheel. Through the restaurant's front window, I could see shadows moving, her hand gesturing wildly, friends leaning in, someone checking their phone like they suddenly had somewhere else to be. The rent envelope lay open on the table in front of her like a dare she didn't know how to respond to. Driving home felt almost strange, like I was cutting class for the first time in years. Our apartment, was dark when I walked in. I flipped on the light, scanning the familiar space. Her plants by the window, her coat thrown over the chair, the framed photo of us at the beach 2 summers ago. My smile in that picture looked genuine then. I pulled out my suitcase from under the bed. Not the small weekend bag, but the one I'd bought years ago when I thought we'd be traveling together more. The zipper's sound filled the room as I opened it and started pulling clothes from the closet. My shirts went in first, then my shoes, then the books I didn't trust her to keep safe. Each movement was deliberate. I wasn't running away. I was making a choice. We'd been in this place for almost 2 years, and in that time, the warmth had drained from it bit by bit. She started hosting more without asking me, filling the living room with her coworkers, people I barely knew, who treated me like an afterthought. The jokes started as harmless digs, then grew sharper, until roommate was the word she used more often than boyfriend. I'd laughed along at first. I didn't realize I was training her to believe she could say anything without consequence. Halfway through packing, I paused, sitting on the edge of the bed. A memory came back, her 29th birthday, when she was sick with the flu. I'd spent the whole day making her soup, bringing tea, queuing up her favorite movies. She'd told me I was the best thing in her life. Tonight, she'd introduced me like I was someone she found on Craigslist. I zipped the suitcase shut and carried it to the door. Then I went to the desk and took out a small folder, copies of the lease, bank statements, and receipts. I'd been keeping them for months now, not because I expected to need them, but because something deep down had started whispering that maybe I wasn't as secure in this relationship as I thought. That whisper had been right. I left my key on the counter. Before walking out, I took one last look around. The apartment was quiet, still smelling faintly of her perfume. For a second, I almost felt the urge to stay, to wait for her to come home so we could talk it out. But then I pictured her standing at that restaurant table, laughing as she called me her roommate, and the urge dissolved. I stepped into the hallway, pulled the door shut, and didn't bother locking it. That night, I checked into a modest hotel on the other side of town. The kind of place with outdated wallpaper and a front desk clerk who didn't ask questions. I laid my suitcase on the bed, sat down, and exhaled slowly. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't even feel free yet. Just lighter, like I'd put down something heavy I'd been carrying for too long. My phone buzzed around midnight. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring. By the fourth missed call, she'd left a voicemail. I didn't listen to it right away. Instead, I set the phone face down on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, letting the quiet fill the space where her voice used to be. I knew then that walking out of that restaurant was only the beginning. She was going to have questions, and soon, she'd realize I wasn't coming back. By the next morning, the calls had turned into texts. First, short and sharp. "Where are you? This isn't funny." Then softer, like she was trying to reel me back. "Can we talk? Please?" I didn't answer any of them. I was sipping burnt hotel coffee when the knock came at the door. Slow, measured. She knew I was inside. When I opened it, she stood there in yesterday's dress, makeup faded, hair pinned half-heartedly. For the first time in a long while, she looked less like the woman who commanded every room and more like the one I'd met years ago, uncertain, searching. "You just left?" she said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "You introduced me as your roommate," I replied. No anger in my voice, just the plain fact of it. She rolled her eyes. "It was a joke. Everyone knew that." I didn't. I let that hang between us. She shifted her weight, like the silence was heavier than she'd expected. Then her tone sharpened. "You embarrassed me with that rent bill stunt." I almost laughed. "You embarrassed yourself when your card got declined. I just handed you a piece of paper." Her jaw tightened. "So, what? This is you leaving me over one comment." One comment. I stepped closer, not aggressive, just making sure she saw I meant every word. "This has been building for months. You stopped introducing me as your partner a long time ago. You started making me the punchline at your dinners, your parties, even in front of your family. Last night just made it obvious you don't see me as someone worth respecting." She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked to the suitcase in the corner. "So that's it." "That's it," I said. "The lease is in both our names for another 3 months. You can handle the rent yourself until then. Or find another roommate." Her mouth opened like she wanted to say something. Maybe an apology, maybe another defense, but nothing came out. She turned toward the door, then stopped. "You'll regret this," she said finally. I shook my head. "No, I regret staying as long as I did." When the door clicked shut behind her, the room felt still again. My phone buzzed minutes later with a single text from her. "You're making a mistake." I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, Word got back to me through mutual friends that she'd spun her own version of the story, how I'd overreacted, how I couldn't take a joke. But some of those same friends had been at that table. They'd seen her smirk when she called me her roommate. They'd watched me walk away. And they knew it wasn't about one night. It was about every night that came before it. I found a small apartment of my own. Sunlight through the blinds in the morning, quiet evenings with no background commentary about how I wasn't enough. I started cooking again, badly, just for myself. It felt good. One Saturday, I walked past the restaurant where it had all happened. Through the window, I saw another birthday table, another group of friends clinking glasses. For a second, it stung, a reminder of what I'd thought I had. But then I realized something. That night, she thought she was making a joke at my expense. But what she'd really done was give me permission to leave without guilt. Permission to stop being the shadow in someone else's spotlight. I smiled, kept walking, and didn't look back.